Hey, everybody, I'm Carey Lohrenz, author of both Fearless Leadership and Span of Control. And today we're going to be talking about what it is you should be focusing on. How are you going to get through uncertainty and these tough times? Probably not the way you think you're going to do it right now. Stay tuned. That's what's coming up.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership strategically, mentally, and emotionally? Do you know what your span of control is, particularly in a crisis? Well, stay tuned because that's where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron, and I am here to assist you tapping into that one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. You can find out more about me by going to dovbaron.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how do we bring people together who completely disagree? It's exactly what your mind, your heart, and your soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some very real and often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, multi-Grammy award-winning entertainers, even some folks you might think are completely crazy, you totally disagree with them, and you find them truly fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com, that's dovbaron.com, and find out how you can sign up to sink your teeth into a delicious episode of Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever it is that you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant, so please get over there, wherever it is you tune in, and do us a favor. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show. We really appreciate it. If you are a regular listener, big thank you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also listen to us on Google Home and Alexa by simply saying play Dov Baron podcast. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Is it possible that when you are a highly trained individual that you can overestimate your span of control? You see, it's a question I found myself pondering a lot lately. If those of us who are highly trained, those of us who believe ourselves to have our poo in a pile, could end up on the wrong side of history. Here's what I mean. Think about a military general. Now, that person must, at least publicly, remain very bipartisan. Imagine that person then jumping in to assist a partisan leader to bring things under control. Does that general, does his or her desire to steer the ship back on course end up facilitating more damage? Well, stay tuned because that's exactly where we're going. Our guest on this episode is the fabulous Carey Lohrenz. Now, she is one of the first female F-14 Tomcat fighter pilots in the U.S. Navy. Carey Lohrenz knows well the inconsistent execution of a fast-moving dynamic environments can generate catastrophic results. Her work has been translated, and she's translated it and her leadership strategy into the experience that she got in the Navy to top business leaders to supercharge their performance in today's competitive business environments, adopting strategies under pressure to reduce errors and overcome obstacles along the way. Carey has appeared on CNN, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, NBC, and NPR. God, that's a lot of acronyms, as well as Inc., Time, Huffington Post, and so many more. She has delivered leadership and strategic experiences to thousands of Forbes, Global 2000, Fortune 500s, and many other companies worldwide. Carey Lohrenz is now CEO. She's a board member, a business owner, and she's a mom of 4. She inspires individuals and organizations to lead through uncertainty, overcoming pressure and adversity to remain relevant and focus on the competitive marketplace. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Carey Lohrenz!
I can hear it. I can hear it.
It's so good to have you here. Thank you for joining us, love. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be joining you.
It took us a while to get here, you know.
I know. Well, you're a busy man.
And you're a busy lady, and that's so great. And just sort of quick backstory on people that Carey and I met, I think it was about 10 years ago, was it?
Yeah, just about.
About 10 years ago at Larry Wingett's house with Joe Calloway and Larry and a bunch of other good friends. Actually, the recording that came out as we were recording this, the last recording that came out was Jim Bouchard, who was also there.
Oh, that's right.
So Jim and I have remained friends ever since. We've stayed in close contact. So great to have you. Thank you. And one of the things I always like to ask my guests in this time where everybody's an influencer and everybody's an expert and all those nonsensical things, who is someone who we might not even know, may not even consider, who's been a major influence on you and on your leadership? Who might that be?
Okay, so if we're talking about right now, so
Mhm.
who would be, say, publicly accessible, if you will? This is going to be a little bit different than maybe what some people actually listen to. I'm actually a huge Rich Roll fan. Rich Roll, his podcast kind of took off probably 4 years ago now, 5 years
Mhm.
ago. Former recovering alcoholic, was a corporate attorney, Stanford swimmer, hardcore ultra distance marathon guy. He also, I think, was a little bit responsible for putting David Goggins on the map. But he broaches topics, whether it's leadership, definitely much more health and fitness and psychology of performance in a slightly different way than some people do. But why I become enamored with
Mhm.
listening to, outside of you, of course, to his podcast is that he's very respectful of different opinions and different views, and that he shares his opinions in a way that he's like, hey, you may agree with me or you may disagree with me. I'd love to hear your side of it. And I think definitely in the times that we're living in now, not only here in the US, but globally, that sort of perspective of, he asks great questions. He listens to understand,
Mm.
not to be right.
Yeah.
And so, again, a little bit different than probably what some
Vitally
people
important.
may think about,
Thank you. I really
hey,
appreciate
what am
that.
I going to go to? But he's done a great job. So I like to listen to him when I'm out running or out walking, or again, you don't agree with everything he says, or maybe even necessarily what his guests say, but he hits all levers of performance, from mindset, nutrition, history, the brain piece of it, just all of it. So I find him pretty fascinating.
Fabulous. Yeah. I can't remember the name of his podcast though.
I think it's called the Rich Roll Podcast.
Is it just called that? Yeah. Okay.
Rich Roll.
Good.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I
Yeah.
will make sure that we let people know about that too. Thank you. So let's start here. Your new book, Span of Control. The Span of Control. So that's a term. So let's just define it for people. What does that mean? What does the span of control mean?
So the way people think about it historically and or in business is this idea of span of control from an org chart perspective.
Right.
And that's not what this is.
No.
This is about a mindset, and yet being very, very clear. And when you think of span of control as a mantra or a framework or a process, that it's this idea that's based on multiple frameworks, as well as a lot of science and research. And it's this idea that you have to, your span of control is determined by those things that you can and should be focusing on, with the very specific understanding that everything else is just a distraction. So it's about
Right.
being very intentional about what it is that you're focusing on.
Okay. So is it, because I was reading this and I want to make sure that people understand it, because I think people often overestimate what their real span of control is. So is it really as much about getting clear about what you don't have control of so that you can get focused on what you do have control of?
Absolutely. So I'd break it down into three really simple areas. Now, let me back it up for just a second. To be
Sure.
clear, as a fighter pilot, our goal was to, because we operated in such sophisticated environments where they were fast moving, they were changing, the dynamics of that environment were constantly changing. We were overwhelmed with information all
Hmm.
of the time.
Hmm.
What we had to be able to do was have enough knowledge and enough frameworks, combined with either very limited experience or throughout the course of time more experience, the ability to clarify the complex.
Hmm.
So what span of control means for me is essentially three things. So
Right.
the first thing is this idea of intentionally understanding and getting clear on focusing on what matters most. So in my world, I always say you have to every day begin with identifying your top three things and then being intentional about what you're saying no to. So that first thing is focus on what matters most. The
Mm.
second thing is always have a flight plan for success. Because if you don't have a framework, and it doesn't have to be complex or complicated, you'll always be in reaction mode. And then the third thing, especially from a leadership perspective, when you understand what your purpose is and what you're focusing on, when you're moving forward with intentionality, and then you have that plan in place, you have to be able to communicate what's possible. You have to communicate what's possible even in your own internal dialogue, but then
Mm.
definitely what's possible to your team. And it's critical that you're able to make it concise, specific, and even, dare I say, inspirational, right? Otherwise, people are just going to be like, okay, whatever. Yeah, we have another platitude next,
Hmm.
right? And they're on to their own concerns. So it's understanding this in three buckets, if you
Hmm.
will, so that you're able to take all of this just extreme amounts of data and information that are assaulting your senses in your inbox on a daily basis and be able to make sense with it.
So I want to come back to those three buckets in a minute, but I want to focus in on this other part because I want people to grasp that first. Because I said I think it's the greatest challenge is this the places we think we have control where we don't. You and I
Mhm.
were just talking about something about this before we started recording, and it's actually something that comes up for many people right now. I'll give an example. Um, Many people feel that they have no control. In fact, Senator Bernie Sanders has been fighting for it for as long as anybody knows him, which is universal health care in the United States. Many people are terrified of getting sick because once they do, their whole lives could be out of control as a result of being that there is a system that is designed, it seems at least, to remove control from the person. And I know you had direct experience with this because it's right in the opening of the book where you're talking about your mom uh, and what was going on there in the context of health. And, you were scheduled. I'm not going to tell the story. You could tell the story. Tell us a little bit about that because here's somebody you highly trained in managing your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors fulfilling what you need to get done, and then there's an out of control situation, and how do you manage that? So I want people to get a firsthand experience of it. Is that okay?
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And it wasn't my intention when I first started writing this book to actually include much of any of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my first book that I wrote, I told a story about, I shared not just a story, but I shared the experience about what happened with my dad and losing my dad through a patient safety issue. It was essentially a hospital mishap.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a couple of years ago, when, before, this is pre-COVID, I'm out on the road. I'm just, I do about 100 events a year. So it's a pretty arduous travel schedule. And my goal has always been, and this is for me personally, I try to keep, I'm not an oversharer on social media. I try to keep what happens personally very separate from what happens professionally with me, because my position on stage, I don't believe is to be an antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
It's to be an advocate and to show people a different path of what's possible. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, for whatever reason, don't usually bring in some of currently what's happening to me right now in that moment on stage.
Right.
And yet I found myself in a position a couple of years ago in March that right in the midst of a very heavy travel season, my mom fell ill. And at first we thought she was, she was diagnosed with pneumonia.
Right.
And after a couple of weeks of this, and she was down in Florida, I live in Minnesota and I'm crisscrossing the country. After a couple of weeks of this, she wasn't getting better. She was in fact actually getting worse. And it was only because of they were giving her heavier and heavier doses of antibiotics. And I was flying in and out and trying to spend time with her, even if it was just for a night, and getting right back on a plane at 5 a.m., flying to the West Coast, flying back again that same
Mm-hmm.
day, trying to, read charts, read documents, going, I don't understand. They were assaulting her with stronger and stronger antibiotics and medicine, and she was getting worse.
Wow.
The long and the short of it was, only by chance, at one point in time, after the microbiologists or whoever were looking at all the slide specimens, an oncologist happened to be in there and took a peek at her slide and said, well, what do you mean pneumonia? That's not what she has. She's had stage 4 cancer. So the doctors essentially came out and said, whoops-a-daisies, we were wrong.
That's good. Thanks.
And she has stage 4 cancer. But because of the way the healthcare system is set up, and particularly a couple of laws in Florida, in order for her to get discharged from the hospital to go over to a cancer center, she had to be walking. But they had so eviscerated and knocked her system to shreds. Her legs were swollen. She could no longer walk. She couldn't get out of bed. She went in fully ambulatory,
Oh my God.
no problems. And now she couldn't get out of bed. So every day I would come in and I would be like, come on, mom, you just have to be able to get out of bed. Just show them you can go to the bathroom so they can discharge you and readmit you to a cancer center.
Right.
And they ended up, for some reason, discharging her to a physical rehabilitation center that then they could have readmitted her to the cancer hospital.
Right.
But in the interim, I flew home because I'd been gone for over a month.
Right.
And by about day 2, while I was trying to be a patient advocate, figuring out where can I get her a CAT scan? I don't care. I'll hire an ambulance. We'll go do this. We need to figure out what the next steps are.
Right.
She ended up crashing at the physical rehab center, and they intubated her in the hospital or in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. And from that point in time, that day, I was on a flight right back down to Florida. And within about 3 days, she had passed. And we lost just an inordinate amount of time with her. It was navigating a system that was broken, that failed her. And that had it even not been for me advocating nonstop and my brother asking questions nonstop, she probably would have died in that bed thinking she had pneumonia. It was the most heart-wrenching, oddest thing. At the same time I'm doing events, at the same time I'm trying to hold it all together
Right.
and feeling like I have zero control of an outcome simply because anybody I called who picked up the phone said, "Well, I don't know. That's just how we do it." Not what's best for the patient, not, "Holy cow, she has a cancer diagnosis. You're right. We're going to check her out and check her right back in." Literally down the wing into the
Oh my
cancer
goodness.
cancer wing,
But we can't do that because that's not
because
what we
that's
do.
not what our rules say.
So you lost both parents really from, I'm going to use a strong term, but medical malpractice. You
Yeah.
lost both of them through ignorance, through a system that is broken.
Yeah. Y Yeah,
You
and
know,
it's devastating it would be devastating for anybody on a
of
personal
course.
level. My dad was a former Marine Corps pilot, flew for
Wow.
Delta for 36 years, so he was all about safety and teamwork and communication and a good process. And hey, if you do something wrong, admit it so we can all adjust and fix it.
Yep.
And would that have changed the outcome for my mom? Yeah, actually, it would have bought us time
Yes.
and it would have bought us quality time. Where if nothing else, when they kept telling her she had a cold or it's probably just pneumonia, they could have looked at her, done a draw, screened it for cancer, and said, "You know what? We're going to zip you back up. This is bad. Go sit
Mhm.
out in the sun. If
Mhm.
don't wear sunscreen, have a cocktail, it's not treatable, hug the people that you love."
Yeah.
And we didn't get that. And,
So the dignity,
unfortunately,
so that malpractice actually removed the dignity, removed the humanity from the situation. And this is such an important point because we're talking about this idea of control,
mhm,
and that sometimes we're outside the span of control of a situation, but we're outside of a span of control of a situation that needs to be controlled because it's out of control itself. And and it's a horrible experience, and I would wish it not on anybody. But I really, because it's so human and so raw, and I apologize because I know it's raw. What do you, how do you speak to people who are in that situation where they feel like I am a person who've got my poo in a pile. I'm a pretty together guy person, um, and I'm dealing with a system that's broken, and I could actually fix it, or I know how to fix it. I know what needs to be fixed. Even if I couldn't, I could help people in place. Like that level of out of control in a situation that is not your, like, what do you say to somebody like that, Carrie? I really want to know.
it's a great question. And unfortunately, right now, I think there are going to be a lot of people who have already found themselves in
Hmm.
this situation.
Absolutely.
Uh, here in the US, we've had a really, really difficult time navigating successfully as a community
Yep.
this pandemic, not only from a healthcare perspective, but from a community behavior perspective, as well as from a jobs market perspective.
Yep.
The chasm between the haves and the have-nots, or the pockets of people who have become even bigger billionaires, to the large segments of people who, through no fault of their own, who have been showing up at work every day, have been great contributors, have been leading teams for 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, 40 years of tenure. now have been ascribed a value of replaceable or
Mm-hmm.
done. You're
Oh, yeah.
done.
Yeah.
And so much of our identity is tied up into what that title is or what
Mm-hmm.
our experience has been
Yeah.
in the job market, if you will, that what can happen is very, very quickly we can sink into this time or this feeling or this space of um, victimhood, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, if you will.
Exactly.
And the danger, and I don't mean that people shouldn't feel sad or that they're not going to feel sad or that they're not going to feel vulnerable and scared and out of control, all those things. 100% you
Mm-hmm.
will. And probably for a lot of you listening right now, you do. And I think that what I have found, not only with myself, but working with high performers for the last 20 years, is that there has to come a point in time that you give yourself a period that you mourn for that with which that you have lost. Sorry, I just
Mm-hmm.
totally garbled that up. You have to give yourself that space to mourn and feel betrayed and feel empty and feel like a shell of a human. And then you have to put one foot over here on the different horse in the circus
Mm-hmm.
and go, and now what? What can I do next? And it's this idea of what is it going to take to both reject that victimhood, but then start taking action, right? And it might be a little thing, right? For me, I had to be super, super mindful and intentional on, even when my mom was in the hospital, the way that I interacted with the nurses, with the staff, even with the doctors. Because if you start coming with a sledgehammer, of
Yeah. Of
course they're going to shut down, right?
course.
And I had the opportunity to see doctors in person. Right now, people don't have that.
No.
They're in the parking lot.
Yeah.
They're trying to navigate healthcare for loved ones in the
Via
parking
their
lot.
phone. Yeah.
They're trying to navigate virtual learning for their kids with 3 kids in the back seat on Wi-Fi
Yeah.
while you're on a Zoom call for work.
Yeah.
And so it's readjusting and almost recalibrating right now, I think right now, what success looks like. And I think that the time that we're in right now, that's really, really important, that we don't get lost in the filtered BS that we see on Instagram, and the BS. Hey, here's your 6 steps to life hack of how to hack your way to be a number 1 performer, right? Because there's a whole mess of us right now that people are just hanging on. So it's narrowing the scope, actually. Go ahead and binge a little bit on Netflix if you want. Binge a little bit on Hulu or Prime or whatever your poison is, but put a guardrail on it
Yeah.
and tell yourself, I'm going to watch 2 episodes and then I'm going to get back to doing something I know will put either myself or my team in a space, even a headspace that's more valuable than where I am right now.
Right.
And it's navigating this. And I do think this is where we every day, I mean, I got it tattooed on my wrist when my mom was in the hospital. And it's an
Mm-hmm.
S, it's a little O, and it's a C that if I'm on stage, people think it's a decoration.
Mm-hmm.
But if I put my hand in front of me in a serving motion, I see it. And it's a reminder of span of control, span of
Yep.
control, span of control. What can I do to end up in a place more valuable than where I am right now, or help somebody else get to a place that's more valuable than where they are right now?
Well, you brought up something very powerful and important, and I think that this is something that most people, particularly those of us who are highly trained, those of us who are leaders, who hold ourselves in, I've got my shit together sort of, idea. And that is something I talked about when I had my fall. And I said, the point where, people say, oh, the fall must have changed. And I said, no, it didn't. It wasn't what changed me. It was what came after. It's the moment of making a choice to not go back to normal. And everybody's talking about, when we get back to normal, normal's over. So don't try and go back to normal. But the challenge is, if you get that normal's over, you are now left with the most seductive of all choices. And the seduction is to being a victim. It's very seductive because it doesn't require you to do everything, and you have complete justification. Those bastards killed my parents with a terrible system. It's not my fault. Those bastards fired me, because of the coronavirus. It's not my fault. Those bastards in the government did this, or that happened, or this didn't happen, or whatever it is. And it's so seductive. And for me, the only thing that turned it around was, why am I here? What can I do in the direction of why I'm here? i.e., what do I have control over? And who can I serve? That was what saved my life. Who can I serve? And when I felt like absolute crap and I had nothing, I went to a place of going, the only way I can serve in this moment, because I feel so horrible, is I can go for a walk and I can smile at people who are walking by. Now, today you're wearing a mask. Okay. So here's what I did. And I'm not saying this is right. It was it actually was only to move my head. I don't want to know whether it's true or not true, whether it worked or didn't work. It was just my way to serve, and it got me out of my own head. And that is, as I walked past people, I would bless them. I would imagine this energy of love leaving my heart and washing over them. I called it a blessing. You can call it whatever you want. And it was just like, and it would immediately make me feel better. And it would give me a sense of control of something when you feel out of control. And we are in this situation of feeling out of control. And your book really lays out a structure for confronting overwhelm, because a lot of this out of control is this constant sense of overwhelm. Walk us through a little bit of that, if you could.
It is, no doubt. And I think what's fascinating in what you were just sharing about how you worked through it, one of the things that a couple of things that I always share with people is that adversity introduces you to yourself.
Yes.
Adversity introduces you to who you really are, those vulnerabilities, as well as those strengths.
Yep.
And what you were sharing about how you said that you were actively blessing people, there's a mechanism in that, not only from a control perspective, because you were holding on to a little piece. And and I talk to people about this, even about an attitude and how you show up matters. And by that, I do not mean, nor do I ever want it to be interpreted as, hey, every day you show up, you have to be all smiles and #blessed. This is awesome, right? With unicorns and butterflies and sparkly, really
and all
relaxing
that other crap
piping in the background. It's not that.
No,
it's not that. But having a positive attitude does mean you still have standards. You're going to be working towards getting better. Doesn't mean that everything is going to be forward motion, and that you do realize, and that psychologically and scientifically you realize that although a positive attitude does not guarantee success, as important, a negative attitude kills your ability to adapt. And what's happening right now, and I'm going to say in large part because of media and social media, and it doesn't even matter which side of the fence you are on right now.
No.
Everything is negative. Everything is negative. And you know this, Dov, from a brain science perspective, our brains are historically wired and scientifically wired to hang on to the negative.
Yep.
Like you can remember 99 negative things, or you hear one negative thing and 99 positive things have disappeared.
Yep.
because your brain is wrapped around protection mode and scarcity. And that's a warning. And watch out, secure your environment, protect yourself, put up the
Yep.
wall. And when we're being inundated with all of this negativity, if you're watching the news, if you're scrolling social media, if you are doom scrolling and feeding your brain with all of that, you've got no chance of coming out on top, because you are hardwired to survive right now. And it's so damaging. So what you found power in was in that taking action of the one thing you could control.
Yep.
And that was to throw a little bit of positivity out there, right? And it wasn't BS positive. You're like, I am literally going to try to make somebody else's day better. And
Yeah. And I
even
think you've got to do that for them, and you've got to do it for you. So my one of my friends came over. I was in the darkest place, and he came over and he goes, like, he knew because I talked to him on the phone. He goes, "How do you look so good when you're feeling so terrible?" And I go, "What do you mean?" And I didn't look good. I had bags under my eyes and I was still recovering from surgery. And I go, "What are you talking about? I look like shit." And he goes, "No, not that." He goes, "Your shirt is pressed beautifully." And I go, "Yeah." I said, "I ironed my shirt." And it's like, you and I had talked about this in a previous conversation about the general and make your bed, right? So it
yeah,
was like,
yeah.
it was my way of saying, I'm not beaten yet, because I will not have anybody over. I will not meet anybody in an unpressed shirt. And I still have the seam down the arm, and and it's just, and for me, it was meditative. People go,
Well,
"Oh, you hate
yeah, because
shining?"
it's
No,
that
it's a
one little thing. I will
meditation.
share with you, even I was going through one of the habits that I picked up even during flight school. Everybody had different ways of dealing with the stress and,
Yep.
and even learning really critical things. And, some people juggled, some people bounced a tennis ball. My thing was, and probably because I saw my dad doing it growing up, I would polish my boots. Now, from a military perspective, people are like, oh, you're going to kick your boots anyway on the airplane. They're going to get scuffed, or, if something happens and you go down in hostile territory, you're going to have to knock the shine off. And I'm like, fine. But when I was stressed, or I remember specifically when I lost friends,
Hmm.
you could tell almost the depth of how sad I was by how shiny my boots were.
Yeah. And
Because
but
I
they,
was sitting there with a toothbrush on every thread, right? Because that
but
was
that's the thing
one.
that I want people to get here, because obviously our audience are high performing
Mhm.
individuals. And one of the things, I'm writing a lot about this right now, is high performers who overperform during stress. And I
Yes.
understand that. I get it,
Yes.
because I'm one. I get it. I understand that. I'm not judging anybody. I'm one. My workload goes up, not down on stress. People go,
Yeah.
you need to take some time off. I'm like, no, I don't. That actually would not work for me. But the challenge with that is there's an overperformance and the danger of then compartmentalizing the feelings that come out as a version of PTSD later. And so the importance of, yes, fine, polish your shoes, make your bed, iron your shirt, whatever it takes, bless people, whatever it is, that's fine. But feel the feelings, because you can't compartmentalize all of the feelings all of the time, because you will internally explode. Whether that's internal or external, you'll explode. And one of the things that I know from the book, I mean, first of all, we know that people are doing that. And meanwhile, we also know that during the pandemic, alcohol sales in the United States have gone up almost 250%. We're all trying to cope. I get that. But one of the things you've talked about in the book is, yeah, you got to manage this control. You got to look at all of those buckets that we talked about at the beginning. But talk to us about feeling the feelings and managing the situation, because for many people, it's either or. I'm either a snotball mess in the corner, or I've buttoned up and I'm controlled and it's fine. And it's not one, it's both. Talk to us about that from your point of view.
Yeah, I 100%. And this is where, again, one of my, so this is me, being completely transparent with the audience, that I don't like feeling vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much most people don't. but
No.
I also came from a culture and an environment in the upper Midwest that also was extraordinarily stoic. And
So you
so
come from a
we
waspy environment and you're a military family and you become part of the military. Feelings, not really an option.
nobody has time for that, right?
No time for
You
that.
don't have
It's
time
like,
for that. You
no
set
time
that
for that.
aside.
Yeah.
You compartmentalize and you do your job. And it caught up with me actually
Yes.
when my kids were really young. And I brought it into the book because I was like, people can look from the outside in and go, well, she doesn't understand. She's really lucky. I've seen her Instagram. She used to travel.
Yeah.
Not really traveling much right now.
No.
She looks like she has nice kids and everything. She's just luckier than I am, right? Or better resourced. And and even with all of those skill sets of understanding how do you work through task overload, how do you work through stress and task saturation and all of these things and multiple, priorities pulling on you. I ran into a point where right after I'd had my fourth child, my husband was gone most of the month. I was struggling we just moved to a new place. I found out two of my kids had to have pretty important, pretty serious surgery done almost at the same time. We didn't have any family. We didn't have any friends down there. I'm trying to run a business. I'm on boards. And I felt like I was handling it all until all of a sudden I started getting a couple of episodes where I was like, I think I might be having a heart attack. Like I felt like I was going to pass out. I was super sweaty. My heart was just going 1,000 miles an hour. And I actually had to go to the doctor to figure out what was going on.
Mhm.
And I wore this Holter monitor or heart monitor for almost a month. And they tracked and they discovered that every time my heart rate was going up to about 185 beats per minute, which
Wow.
if you've ever worked out at all, you'll know that that's like almost max performance because
Yeah.
I was, 32 years old.
Yeah.
So
You got to
that's how
really push.
fast.
You got to really push to get to 155. When you're
Yeah.
in the 180 plus, it's like,
Yeah.
Christ,
And they identified that that was happening when at nap time,
Yeah.
at the times when I was trying to get all four of my kids in the car to get somewhere on time, and at bedtime. Now, I don't, no one's shooting at me. I'm not on fire. How on earth is my body reacting to the stress in that way? And yet you step back from it. And I realized at that point in time, I was literally not only trying to do all of the things I thought were expected of me, all of the things that I thought I needed to do at 100% and do really well. And it almost killed me. So I had to take a step back and go, you know what? I'm buying banana bread loaves from Costco. I'm still on the PTA board, but I am not baking 17 different kinds of bread and wrapping them all up and doing this. And I had to figure out what were those things that, if maybe I used to spend 8 hours on a proposal, it was now down to 4. I looked at it, I'm like, yep, the rest of it we can discuss. It's good, it's above average. It may not be perfect, but it's good enough.
Mhm.
And I actually, not just from an Instagram motivational BS, hype square, hey, let go of perfect and do good enough. I actually had to recalibrate what that looked like to keep the ball moving forward in a productive way so it didn't kill me.
Right.
And that was a huge aha moment for me, even personally, because I thought, holy cats, I've had years of training on task overload, stress management. I know sports psychology. I was a high performing athlete and it almost killed me. So now you go to where we are today with people leading teams virtually, people trying to sit in a closet on a Zoom call that, again, have kids probably that are trying to do the school thing. We're trying to manage care from across the pond. And yet, I tell Dov, I don't know what you've done. What I've done is I'm doing virtual events now. is I tell people right at the outset, right before we hit the record button, I'm like, if you have a kid that comes in, or a dog that starts barking, or a cat that wants to get picked up, pick them up and show them to us. Like, do the Lion King.
Yeah.
Hey, look what I'm also doing.
Yep.
Because anything less right now is making everybody else feel bad and feel not worthy and not up to the task.
That's such great advice, Carey. Really is. It's
I know I
so
kind of went off on a tangent on
no,
that.
no, but not at all. I think it's vitally important because one of the things I tell the leaders that I work with right now, I've taught you every strategy I can think of, but here's what I'm going to tell you. You need me more than ever because now it's not strategy, it's humanity. It's the things I've taught you about your humanity. And what you say about, your kid comes in the room, pick him up. The dog comes in the room, pat the dog. The cat walks across the camera. Okay. We saw the cat's ass. Who cares?
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't really matter. And this is so important for us because we forget all this. We still are trying to play that game and it just doesn't work. Those days are over. And as you said, and I say this to A-types all the time, I know you think you've got it together. I did a video where I talked about one of my clients she's a CEO of a company. She's very high performing. She has a poo in a pile. She's amazing. And I talked to her and I was giving her all the strategies and helping her with her breathing and her maintenance, all this, and everything was good. And about 5 months into the pandemic, she said, I don't know what's going on. I'm falling apart. I'm a mess. I can't get my head together. I said, well, okay, have you? I've managed everything. It's been fantastic. I said, can I ask you a question? She goes, yeah. I said, are things feeling pretty normal? And she goes, well, yeah. I mean, apart from that we're remote, we've got the systems in place, and yeah. And I said, that's the problem. And she goes, what? I said, this is PTSD. It's post. And for us who are high performers, who are A-types, we're feeling it later. So while your team were falling apart, that just put you on high function. When your team now doesn't need you, now your brain goes, oh, I can relax.
I know. And it's not sustainable.
No, it's not. So
I
here's
just
a
had
tsunami of cortisol and off you go.
Yes, and adrenal fatigue and all of that. I just had a call about a month ago with a senior vice president of a several billion-dollar company. It was on Zoom, and about 10 seconds into it, I looked at her and I said, "Do you want to turn your camera off and just talk?" And she was like, "Yes, I would love that." And I'm like, "Let's do it." So we both turned our camera off, and I go, "Are you going to get up right now and get something to drink and walk around your house?" And she goes, "Yeah, I feel liberated right now." Right? Because it's even that exhaustion that now all of a sudden we're all expected to be staring into a camera that's the size of an eraser head, making eye contact, not looking away, not thinking, not and having to be on and sparkly all the time. And that's just a piece
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah.
Then you look at the people right now who are leading teams that again, you get back to the childcare, you get back to healthcare of managing up a generation or laterally, or friends and family who are getting sick or worried about feeling so disconnected. Because when people are working virtually, I have found great benefit in some areas to virtual work insofar as what's different for me now. If I'm doing an event that has 1,000 or 5,000 people on it, people have access to me in a different way, that they can shoot me something in the chat room that I can answer. So this is a very specific thing insofar as my work is concerned,
Sure.
that those people would have never raised their hands before.
No.
But what I'm also keenly aware of is that probably 70% of the people on that call are struggling with the demons of isolation and wondering, am I now hitting reply all so I'm seen, so my boss knows my work is still valuable, that they see it, and oh my gosh, what's going to happen? I can't afford to lose this job. I can't afford to put the Zoom call on mute because little Becky or little Johnny or my mom's texting me, or whatever the case may be. They'll catch me multitasking. when again, this goes back to right now from a leadership perspective, you have to double down on the personal. You have to double down on the relationship building. You have to double down on picking up the phone and calling people and saying, I don't need anything from you. I'm just checking in on you. Um, because this is table stakes for people's mental health moving forward.
Yes.
And who are we still going to have on board when things start to even out a little bit? Because it's the uncertainty and not knowing the duration globally as
Yes.
everything keeps whipsawing. It's not knowing the duration and that uncertainty that's like an anchor on all of us. So when you say and you talk to your the person you were working with and coaching that they're like, "Oh, I don't understand what it is." It's that.
Yep.
So then you have to acknowledge that, acknowledge the feeling of vulnerability, acknowledge to people that, hey, there are days I like, I got to get an extra cup of coffee too, or an extra 45 minutes on my cardio because that makes me feel like at least I have a chance at coping. And
Yeah,
you got to
and
find
you
that.
know,
You got to find
all
that
the
cure,
all
that
the nice
groove.
ideas
Yeah.
now get washed through the filter. So there are some things that you saw on Instagram. Oh yeah, I should do that. That you really don't give a crap about, and you never will, and it doesn't matter. And there are other things that you were thinking, I probably should do that. That now you absolutely have no choice. That you need to do that. So you know you weren't exercising before. You don't have a choice now, right? You
Yeah.
thought you should meditate. You don't have a choice now, and it doesn't
Yep.
matter what it is. Maybe you call your meditation prayer. Maybe you call it breathing. Maybe you call it meditation. I don't know, but there are things that you've got to do to take care of you. That a lot, and this is very much back to what you were saying, Carey, right at the beginning, which is understanding what you actually have control over rather than what you don't have control over, and taking control over what you have control over, which could be as simple. And this is for me. So being again completely transparent, you know, you and I were talking before we started recording that my mom's on a deathbed. I don't have any control over that. My mom's in the UK. I can't even go there, you know. So all of that, I feel out of control with it. I'm very blessed. My sister's wonderful and she's there, but I'm not in control of that. I'm not in control of how often I can speak to my mom because she's not always awake. And I call every day. But at the same time, I also know I'm good while I'm working because I'm totally focused. Again, it's back to what we just talked about.
Right.
When I
Right.
stop, guess what? The elephant comes and sits on my chest.
I
The
know.
anxiety comes back. That belt around my chest starts tightening. I can feel the anxiety. So guess what I've got to do? I don't have a choice. I got to take care of myself. I
Yeah.
have to block in my schedule, which is a crazy schedule, block 15 minutes so that I pull away from the computer. I go stand outside and I do my breathing exercise because that's what I have control over. And this is what people don't realize. And I have to sit right in my journal and I have to have some tears and feel the pain and say goodbye or whatever it is. And sometimes I do a video and somebody said to me the other day, oh, that was a great video you put out the other day. And I said, thank you. And they said, you're really together. And I said, yeah, thank you. And they said, hold on a sec. Isn't this going on with your mom? I said, yeah. Wow. I can't believe you did that. Oh, believe me, it would have been far less together if my mom was good. It was that's the focus.
Yeah.
And so,
Yep.
yes, you can perform at a high level, but you can't ignore the feelings. And I really appreciate you putting that into the book and allowing people to see that. We're going to come towards the end of the show, and there's a final chapter in the book that I want to address here because I think it's very appropriate. Tell us about the last chapter. Put the ladder down.
So that was one of the probably what's the right grammar on that? Probably one of the funnest and also one of the most impassioned pieces of the book that I wrote,
Mm.
because in my experience, so a story that I share a little bit in that last chapter is that of the WASPs, and they were the Women Air Force Service Pilots. And clearly, and if you're not super familiar with even my journey, it's challenging for anybody to become a fighter pilot, right? The
Yes.
funnel starts out pretty big, and every day it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And there's only a very small percentage of people who ever start off even in flight school that ever go on to make it into the cockpit of a
Mm-hmm.
fighter jet. And partly probably because of my background, and my dad was an aviator. I'd studied, the prisoners of war. I knew about aviators beforehand, and I knew somewhat about the women Air Force service pilots. So I didn't understand when I first started flying. I'm like, I don't understand why this is such a big deal. This is a lot of drama. Like, I don't need any part of this PCBS. I just want to fly, right? And I figured, hey, as long as I perform well, nobody will notice I'm female, which
Mm-hmm.
is also what we call a misperception. Um, but what it was with the WASPs flew in the US almost 2 million flight hours in 1944 and 1945. So they
Wow.
were critical to the US winning that World War, because they did every piece of aviation, the flight testing, the training, the supporting, the fairing, that then allowed the men to go overseas and actually fly in combat overseas. But as soon as that war effort was done, they literally were told, go back home, be good wives, be good mothers, do not ever speak of this experience again.
Crazy.
So then we hit the 50s and the 60s, and a
Mm-hmm.
couple of the women were like, well, wait a second. Like, we were veterans, we served in the war. And they started kind of
Yep.
trying to push back a little bit, asking for that recognition that they were promised, asking for the benefits that they were promised. And then we hit the 60s, and we hit the 70s. Then we hit the 80s, where like Top Gun comes out and I'm still in grade school and high school. Then we hit the 90s, where I fly and people are like, oh, women can't fly combat aircraft. What? Women can't fly. And I'm still looking at this going, this is crazy. And
Mm-hmm.
what I discovered in this time was such an acute lack of awareness of history, when I clearly was standing on the shoulders of the women who came before me. And so the one thing I try to impart on not only my kids, but the people that I work with, as soon as you inch forward, even just a little bit, it is incumbent upon you to put the ladder down to bring somebody with you. This is like being a mentor and being a sponsor at a hyper force multiplier, right? If you get to the top of that mountain you're trying to climb by yourself, I don't consider that a success. If you hit that mid-level manager position, or the executive suite, or you're an SVP, and you're not working just as hard to bring people with you and develop people, I don't look at that as a success. You're going to get a golfer clap from me and go, good for you, but
Right.
I'm not going to respect it. Put the ladder down, bring people with you. If you have found luck and have found coaches and mentors along the way that have enabled you to find success, put that ladder down and help people. Bring people on the journey with you.
I,
Otherwise,
I
for what? What are you
I
doing this for?
I love that. And that's what I really loved in the book. And one of the things about it is, I love that point about how many million hours was it, did you say?
Over 2 million
Over
hours.
2 million, right? Over 2 million hours. And most people don't know about it. I mean, we've seen the poster of the woman with the bicep and all the rest of it. But at the same time, those women were, in many ways, supposed to be forgotten. And I watched a movie recently on Netflix called The Dig, which you may
Oh,
be familiar
yes.
with,
Yeah.
right? And it's about Ray Fiennes playing this guy, Basil Brown, who was a lay archaeologist who never got any credit. And he was the one who knew what to dig for, how to dig for it, and did all of that. And I watch those shows and they always sadden me,
Mm-hmm.
because if you don't have the right letters after your name, it's very easy to be forgotten. But it doesn't mean that people without letters after their name haven't done it. And the letters after the name in this case is 2 million flying hours. And that you're saying, no, hold on a second. Let's bring their attention. Yeah, you've done it. But there was women who were doing this in the Second World War who without them, we may not have won, who did this. So this is,
and I think it's,
and if we don't bring that awareness, that's a terrible loss.
well, and the loss in that, and I saw that movie as well, and apologies to anybody who hasn't seen it, and this might be a little bit of a spoiler, so hopefully you forget it by the time you watch it, is I think they said that once that went to the exhibit went to the British Museum of whatever it's called. I'm sorry, can't remember the name exactly. It was still 10 years before they put his name on the exhibit.
Oh, it was longer. It was longer.
Yeah, they didn't put his name on the exhibit.
Because that happened in the
right
Second
away.
World War when he found it, and he did not, and he was never given credit until the 90s.
It's crazy.
The
crazy.
90s,
and
which is very similar to what you're talking about with these women.
I know.
It's 40 freaking years, 40 plus years later, before we're acknowledging people who made a massive contribution. And so what I would say to leaders today is, who's contributing that you're not giving credit to in this crisis? Who is slipping through the cracks because they're not at the CEO level? Who is the mid-level manager? Who's the janitor? Who's the assistant who's saving the freaking day, but you don't notice them and you're just waiting to get to normal so you can ask them to get your coffee again?
Well, and I think, Dov, I think one of the really important pieces of it too, and I can't restate it exactly because obviously I'm not, reading my book in front of you right now. But where I find, and why it was such an emotional and like part passion and part angry and part frustrating and part, asterisk shakes fist at sky, is by understanding even the story of the wasps and understanding exactly what you just said. What that allows us to do as people, as humans, as leaders, is to understand our capacity to endure and our strength. And you derive strength from hearing other people's stories.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, because of media, too often what we see, unless the story is told in a beautiful way, is we celebrate people's downfall instead of looking at what are the lessons. Somebody find me on my team right now 3 examples of somebody who has been through the shit and they still showed up and were still supportive of somebody else.
Yeah.
That's a story I want to hear, because I want a chance at feeling like when I am in the ditch, when I am so overcome with grief, that there's going to be a light on the other side. And it's only by us sharing those stories that we start to believe in our capacity to endure. It's like I shared a story in there of I've read over the last decades tons of I'm super fascinated by the prisoners of war, our prisoner of war, especially the aviators, their capacity to endure and who did, who didn't, who became really high performers afterwards, in spite of how many years they were just tortured mercilessly. And it's those people who were able to balance a reasonable amount of optimism with understanding realistically that they're in the shit. And it's going to be hard. And when you can do that and you don't sugarcoat it and you find that way forward, you find a way to celebrate the little things, right? Like anybody who's followed me on Instagram, I put stuff on stories, but every 6 months or so, I'll drop something in, some sweaty, ratchet looking shot, because I'm not my hair doesn't stay all pretty and curly when I work out, right? Like I work out hard. I'm not going to look like a perfect cupcake when I'm done. I just try to tell people, I'm like, you don't have to do what you see other people doing, but if you just show up for 12 minutes, I promise you it'll feel better. You don't have to do 45. You don't have to do 75, some 80-minute enduro ride. But over time, by you saying, I'm just going to show up for 12 minutes, 12 minutes turns into 14.
Mhm.
14 turns into 16. Next thing you know, you're at 25, right? And you start believing in your capacity to endure and to grow. But it's only seeing other people and sharing other people's stories and people being willing enough to be vulnerable that we start to believe that we have a shot too.
Yeah. Listen, I have absolutely loved our conversation. I really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know how busy you are. I know even during these times that you're a very highly in demand individual. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share with our audience. Before we finish, I would love for you to tell our audience where they can find out more about you, about the book, and about all of your resources.
Absolutely. You can find me pretty much on all the social channels. I am under my real name, Carey Lohrenz, or you can just go to careylohrenz.com. And my book is going to be available, or it will be available on all the Amazon independent retailers, Audible, all that good stuff. And Dov, I really appreciate it. I know we went down a different path, I think today than maybe we thought, but I think that for all the leaders right now who are listening and who are trying to figure out, how do I hold it together? How do I better manage my people? We have to hit at the personal right now, or the rest of it's not going to work.
I fully agree. It's vitally important. It's probably the most important thing. And where the show goes is where the show needs to go. And I'm more than happy with that. And again,
Thank you,
I
sir.
really thank you for your time. And I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And if you want to find out more about Carey, as I said, we will make sure that you can see all the links to Carey's websites and all of her social media. We really appreciate you being here with us. And for you, dear listener, remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders and you can chat about this episode or any of our past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. The truth is, it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your true capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or a leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, go to dovbaron.com, because unified meaning, or as we like to call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between greatness and mediocrity in companies and in individuals. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about expanding your capacity to endure, about how you can serve in crisis, and about what your true span of control is, what you can let go of, and what you can focus in on. I really appreciate you being with us, and I hope that you will share the show with everybody you know. Till next time, I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.